It's noon. It's the African savanna, somewhere around 2 million years ago, and it is brutally, punishingly hot. The kind of heat that flattens everything. The lions are lying in the shade, panting, completely shut down. Because they physically cannot hunt in this, the antelope are resting. Every sensible predator on the continent has tapped out and is waiting for the sun to drop. And then, out into the open, into the full blaze of the midday sun, walks the single, stupidest-looking animal in the entire ecosystem. No claws, no fangs, can't sprint, can't climb particularly well, skinny arms, and it's just walking, steadily, toward a gazelle. And the gazelle does what gazelles do. It bolts. It explodes into a sprint and is gone in seconds, leaving this slow, weird, upright creature far behind. Easy. And the upright creature does not panic, does not give up, does not even speed up. It just keeps walking in the same direction, following the tracks, dripping with a strange wet liquid leaking from its entire body. An hour later, it finds the gazelle again, resting. The gazelle bolts again. The creature keeps walking. 2 hours, 3 hours, 4, and eventually, the gazelle, standing in the sun, simply collapses. Not from an attack, from heat. Its body has cooked itself from the inside, and it cannot run anymore. And the slow, sweaty, ridiculous-looking creature walks up, calm and steady, and finishes the hunt. That creature is you. That is your ancestor. And the wet liquid leaking out of its skin, the thing you spend money every single day trying to hide and block and cover up, is the deadliest weapon our species has ever owned. So here's the question almost nobody ever stops to ask. Why do we sweat so much? Not a little. Not normally. Humans are, by a wide margin, the sweatiest animal on the entire planet. We are absolutely drenched in sweat glands in a way that no other large mammal even comes close to, and we treat it like a flaw, like a malfunction, like something gross the body does that we have to manage with deodorant and antiperspirant and showers. But what if it's the opposite? What if sweating this much isn't a bug at all? What if being a soaking wet, weirdly hairless, slow-moving ape is the exact reason your species conquered the entire planet? Here's the thing nobody tells you about being human. We have this whole story we tell ourselves about why we won. The big brain, the opposable thumbs, the tools. And those matter, obviously. But long before any of that, before fire was reliable, before language, before weapons that worked, our ancestors had already developed a superpower so quiet and so weird that we don't even recognize it as one. The ability to not overheat. The ability to keep moving when everything else has to stop. While every other animal on the savanna was a prisoner of its own body temperature, forced into the shade by the midday sun, our ancestors had figured out a way to dump heat so efficiently that they could just keep going. And that single ability, the ability to stay cool, reshaped our bodies, drove us to lose our fur, turned us into the best long-distance movers in the animal kingdom, and may have literally built the human body as you know it. So let's actually trace it, from the gland in your skin, to the naked ape, to a hunting strategy so brutal it sounds made up, to the reason you can run a marathon and a horse, in the right conditions, can't. Let's start with the raw numbers, because they're genuinely absurd. The human body has somewhere in the range of 2 to 4 million sweat glands spread across almost the entire surface of the skin. Researchers studying the evolution of human cooling have found that humans have roughly 10 times the density of sweat glands of chimpanzees and macaques, our close primate relatives. 10 times. We are, in the words of the scientists who study this, the naked, sweaty ape, and that is not an insult. It's a description of a world-class biological adaptation. Now compare us to how other animals deal with heat, because once you see the alternatives, ours starts looking like luxury technology. Dogs can't really sweat to cool down, so they pant, hanging their tongues out and rapidly breathing to evaporate moisture from the mouth and airways. It works, but it's limited, and you can't pant and run flat out at the same time for very long. Many birds will flutter the skin in their throats. Some vultures urinate and defecate on their own legs and let it evaporate to cool down, which is a sentence I'm sorry you now have to live with. Kangaroos lick their forearms. Pigs, famously, wallow in mud because they can barely sweat at all. Across the animal kingdom, cooling solutions are clumsy, gross, or severely limited. And then there's us, quietly misting our entire body surface with a fine layer of water that evaporates and pulls heat directly off our skin, across nearly every inch of us, all at once, while still moving. As cooling systems go, it's almost embarrassingly elegant. So, how does this actually work? The science is beautifully simple. When your core temperature starts to rise, your nervous system triggers your eccrine sweat glands. These are the ones spread all over your body, and they release water onto the surface of your skin. Now here's the key. To turn liquid water into vapor, you need energy, specifically heat. So when that water evaporates off your skin, it physically carries heat away with it, pulling it directly out of your body. Your skin is, in effect, a massive evaporative cooling surface, the same basic principle as the swamp coolers people use in dry climates. The water leaves. The heat leaves with it. Your core temperature drops. And because this is happening across your entire body at once, it's incredibly powerful. A human, properly hydrated, can shed an enormous amount of heat this way and keep their internal temperature stable even under serious physical exertion in serious heat. This is why you can exercise hard for a long time without your body temperature spiraling out of control. It's also, by the way, why dehydration is so dangerous in the heat. The entire cooling system runs on water. Run out of water, and the cooling stops, and the temperature climbs. Fast. Sweat is a superpower with a fuel gauge, and the fuel is water. But you can't have a body-wide evaporative cooling system if you're covered in thick fur. And this is where the story takes a turn that connects two things you'd never think were related: sweating and baldness. Because here is the thing about humans that, when you really sit with it, is genuinely bizarre. We are basically naked. Compared to virtually every other mammal our size, we have almost no functional body hair. We're not actually hairless. We have roughly the same number of hair follicles as a chimpanzee. But our hairs are tiny, fine, and useless for insulation. We are, for all practical purposes, the naked ape. And for a long time, nobody could explain why. Fur is useful. It keeps you warm. It protects your skin from the sun. It shields you from scratches and bites. Losing it seems like a terrible idea. So why did our ancestors give it up? The leading answer is sweating. Thick fur traps heat and stops sweat from evaporating efficiently. The water just soaks into the fur instead of evaporating off the skin. If your survival strategy depends on dumping heat by evaporating water off your skin, fur is in the way. So as our ancestors evolved toward becoming heat-dumping, long-distance moving animals out on the hot, open savanna, the fur went and the sweat glands multiplied. Recent genetic research from labs at places like the University of Pennsylvania has even started pinpointing the specific changes in our DNA, in the regulatory regions that control sweat gland building genes, that gave humans this dramatically higher sweat gland density. The naked skin and the extreme sweating evolved together, two halves of the same adaptation. We didn't lose our fur and happen to sweat. We lost our fur so that we could sweat. Now we get to the part that sounds completely made up but is real, documented, and possibly the reason your species exists in its current form. It's called persistence hunting. Here's the core idea. On four legs, over a short distance, almost every animal can outrun a human. A deer, an antelope, a horse, a wildebeest, they will all leave you in the dust in a sprint. We are slow, embarrassingly slow. But sprinting generates a massive amount of internal heat, and most of those fast four-legged animals cool themselves primarily by panting. And here's the catch that changes everything. An animal that is galloping at full speed cannot pant effectively at the same time, because its breathing gets locked to the rhythm of its stride. So a sprinting animal is building up heat with almost no way to release it. It can run incredibly fast, but only for a limited time before it has to stop and cool down. A human, meanwhile, sweating across the entire body, can keep dumping heat continuously while moving. We can't match the top speed, but we can maintain a steady pace, hour after hour. in heat that would force our prey to stop. So the strategy is this. You don't catch the animal, you follow it. It sprints away and gets a huge lead, but it has to stop and pant to cool down. You keep coming, at your steady, unstoppable pace. It sees you, panics, sprints again before it's fully recovered, building up even more heat with less recovery. You keep coming, again and again, until the animal, unable to shed the heat fast enough, suffers hyperthermia. It overheats, it collapses, and you walk up to an animal that no spear ever touched, brought down by nothing but your refusal to stop and your ability to stay cool. The anthropologists Dennis Bramble and Daniel Lieberman laid out the case in detail in a landmark 2004 paper, arguing that endurance running and our heat-dumping biology weren't accidents. They were central forces that shaped the entire human body. Our long legs, our springy tendons, our ability to breathe independently of our stride, and yes, our sweat. And here's the part that makes it real, instead of just a cool theory. Persistence hunting wasn't just something that maybe happened a million years. It survived into recent human history and has been documented by anthropologists watching it happen with their own eyes. Hunter-gatherer groups, including peoples of the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa, were observed running down antelope and other game across hours of relentless pursuit under the blazing sun, exactly the way the theory predicts, the animal sprinting and stopping, the humans never stopping, until the prey simply could not continue. No bows, no traps, just legs, patience, and sweat. And you don't even need to be a Kalahari hunter to feel this superpower yourself. Think about endurance sports. There are annual races where humans literally compete against horses over long distances, and in the right conditions, hot weather, long enough course, the humans can actually win. A human marathon runner can keep a steady pace for hours in conditions that would force most animals to stop and cool down. We are, pound for pound, among the very best long-distance movers in the entire animal kingdom, and it traces directly back to this. Every time you push through a long run and feel that sweat soaking your shirt, you're not experiencing a weakness. You're running the single most successful hunting software our species ever wrote, and it still works. But we have to deal with the elephant in the room, or rather, the smell in the room. Because if sweat is this magnificent superpower, why does it make us stink? Why do we spend billions of dollars a year on deodorant to cover up the byproduct of our greatest evolutionary achievement? And the answer is genuinely surprising. Fresh human sweat is, for the most part, basically odorless. That's right. The sweat itself doesn't really smell. What smells is what happens next. Humans actually have two main types of sweat glands. The eccrine glands, the cooling ones spread all over your body, mostly release water and salt, and that's nearly odorless. But you have a second type, apocrine glands, concentrated in places like your armpits and groin, and these switch on at puberty. They release a thicker, richer secretion full of proteins and fatty compounds, and that, on its own, still doesn't smell like much. The stink comes from bacteria. Your skin is covered in microbes, and certain bacteria, especially species of Corynebacterium, feast on the compounds in apocrine sweat and break them down into the pungent molecules we recognize as body odor. So the smell isn't you. The smell is a tiny ecosystem of bacteria eating your sweat and producing waste. Which raises an interesting question. If the cooling sweat is odorless, why do we have the smelly apocrine kind at all? The leading idea is that, like blushing or tears, body odor may have started as a form of chemical communication, a way of signaling things like identity, emotional state, even genetic compatibility to others, long before we wore clothes or showered or had any concept of smelling bad. The thing you try hardest to wash off every morning may once have been a language. And here's where the story turns, because there's a real cost hidden inside this superpower, and it's becoming more dangerous, not less. Sweating is an extraordinary cooling system, but it has a hard limit, and that limit is water and conditions. Sweat only cools you if it can evaporate. In very high humidity, the air is already so saturated with moisture that your sweat can't evaporate off your skin. And when that happens, the entire cooling system fails. You can be drenched in sweat and still overheating, because the water isn't leaving, which means the heat isn't leaving either. Scientists measure this danger using something called the wet bulb temperature, essentially a measure of heat combined with humidity. And above a certain wet bulb threshold, no amount of sweating, no shade, no fan can keep a human's core temperature stable. The body cooks regardless of how fit or hydrated you are. For almost all of human history, those conditions were rare enough that our superpower nearly always worked. But as the planet warms, the regions that cross that deadly heat and humidity threshold are expected to grow, and the very adaptation that let our ancestors conquer the hottest savannas on Earth has a ceiling we are slowly pushing the world toward. The naked, sweaty ape that beat the heat for 2 million years is now living on a planet capable of producing heat its body was never built to survive. The superpower is real. It is also not unlimited, and we are, for the first time, testing its edges on a global scale. So why are humans the sweatiest animal on Earth? Because sweat isn't a flaw, it's a triumph. It's one of the oldest and most defining things about what it means to have a human body. Long before we were smart, we were cool. Before the big brain, before the language, before the tools that actually worked, our ancestors had already won a quiet, invisible war against their own body heat, and that victory rewrote our entire anatomy. We lost our fur for it. We grew long legs and springy tendons for it. We learned to breathe out of sync with our steps for it. We became, against all odds, the animal that doesn't stop. Think about everything that flows from that. The migrations out of Africa across brutal terrain, the ability to spread into nearly every climate on Earth, the endurance that let us follow herds, cross deserts, and outlast almost anything we chased. So much of the human story is a story of going further than we should have been able to, of not stopping when every other animal had to. And underneath all of it, doing the quiet work, is this unglamorous, slightly gross, completely overlooked ability to leak water from our skin. The thing you're embarrassed by in a job interview is the same thing that carried your ancestors across a continent. So the next time you're on a long walk on a hot day and you feel that familiar dampness spreading across your back, and your first instinct is to feel gross about it, stop for a second. Remember the creature from the start of this video, the slow, weird, upright ape walking out into the midday sun while every predator on the savanna hid in the shade. Remember that it didn't have claws or fangs or speed. It just had the one thing the gazelle didn't. It could keep going. That ape is still inside you. Every drop of sweat running down your skin is your body doing exactly what it was built to do 2 million years ago. The same thing it did when it ran down animals that no human could ever have caught any other way. You're not malfunctioning. You're not gross. You're just doing what your species has always done better than almost anything else alive. You're cooling down. You're staying in the hunt. You're outlasting the heat. You're being the most relentless animal the planet ever produced.